Thanks for joining us today. I'm Marlon Bowling with you, your tour guide to the ag commodities. Well, we're going to take a look at the markets from the perspective of one Mr. Brian Hoops. Now, he's the president of Midwest Market Solutions. He hails from Springfield, Missouri, and he joins us right now. Brian, to kick things off, we did have an overnight export sale. This time it was 132,000 tons of, guess what? Soybeans. They were sold this time to China. So we are continuing what has been almost an unbroken string of overnight export sales of soybeans. Very little mention of corn, though, and that's starting to get kind of unsettling here. Brian, why would that be?
Yeah, good morning, Marlon. Good to talk with you again. You know, last week we had a sale of soybeans every day. This week, 2 out of 3 days. So it's a pretty successful string of soybean sales. This was to China, so that's the positive news. It was also a little bit of negative news from the standpoint that it's for the 22-23 marketing year, so another year back, not this current marketing year, but China is seemingly trying to get some inventory around them. Yeah, concerning that we're not seeing any corn sales yet. Notice that a lot of the crop consultants have downgraded the South American soybean crop in Brazil and Argentina, but they really have not done much changes with the corn crop. And I think until they start to really see this crop in retreat, we're really not going to see much in the way of corn sales. And I think that's a disappointment. I thought we'd see a lot of corn sales going through this winter as the corn crop would be hurt as well. And seemingly that's not been the case so far this marketing year. But, we started off last fall talking about the corn market needing to rally to buy some acres. And it's been the soybean market that's rallied and bought those acres through the winter months. And part of that is because of the strong export pace. It's tightening up the balance sheet. So when you have tighter balance sheets, that means you do need to have more acres to replenish those pipelines.
Well, we did have a bit of a rebound in the overnight trade last night. Let's go to the Globex market prices. Our quotes are provided by a bar chart here. And if you look at the corn, you have the March contract 2 cents higher when we wrapped up the overnight session. 6.40 was the last trade, and you had the December corn 1/4 cent lower, and it was at 5.89.5 per bushel. In the soybeans, we had a little bit of a rally in the overnight trade. We had March gaining 11 3/4 cents, back up to 15.63 per bushel. It backed off of its high when it was at 15.71 3/4, so it came off of that by nearly 9 cents in that overnight session. Also, for those watching the new crop November soybeans, they had a last trade of 14.36.5, and that was up 4.5 cents, but you can tell that spread was still widening out. Now, let's look at the wheat market, and we'll go first to Chicago. Well, in Chicago, we had just a slight bit of firmness. We were up a penny in the March at 7.80 3/4. In the Kansas City market, we had the March contract trading 1/4 cent higher at 8.06 1/4. Very quiet trade there. And in the spring wheat trade, you had the March finishing up at 9.51 1/4, and that was down a penny 3/4. So a couple of things here, Brian. On the soybeans here, there was a story that came out from Reuters, and we'll have more details on that coming up, I believe, this morning. But there was a story that soy crushers in Paraguay, they reportedly may run out of soybeans due to their drought down there, and that's probably catching the market's attention here. It dovetails with what you were talking about with the current growing season down there.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to, be part of what is happening with the growing season. They're running so tight on supplies that not only will they not be exporting, some of their crushers may be limiting how much of the crush that they're going to put out there. That would be friendly for soybean meal as well here in the United States. Sometimes we do see some meal being imported into parts of the country from South America, such as North Carolina will import soybean meal. I don't think that'll be the case this year. The demand should be strong for U.S. meal products, for soybean products, and just opens the door for more exports, whether it's this marketing year or the next marketing year.
Yesterday, we heard Russian troops were pulling back away from the Ukrainian border. Now, this morning, the talk is not so fast on that report, that in some other areas they're still adding to the troops. Is that going to affect the wheat market, for example, today?
Yeah, it really should. What we're hearing is that they said they pulled troops away. There's no evidence that they did. So I don't know that you can believe a lot of what's coming out of the Russian community or out of that country. It should affect the wheat market. It should be positive for corn. It should be positive for wheat here. Right now, Ukraine is still able to export out of some of their sea and some of their regions that they normally have been doing. But if there is an invasion, it's thought that part of what Russia will do is blockade some of these ports in some of the regions so that the Ukraine is not able to ship out product, including corn, including wheat.
Okay.
And that would be friendly for our U.S. wheat prices if indeed that does happen.
All right, just wanted to ask you about that. Brian, we'll be back and we'll chat about livestock in just a moment. We're back with Brian Hoops. Let's talk a little livestock. Brian, when we wrapped up the livestock trade yesterday, and we'll go ahead and review the prices here. Yesterday, we had plus signs about everywhere you looked here on the April contracts on the live cattle and on the lean hogs. Let's take a look at live cattle. Where did they settle? Well, let's take a look. On the big board yesterday, we finished 55 higher at 146.90 per hundredweight. So solid gains across the board when they came across the finish line. On the feeder cattle market, pretty impressive, over $1 higher everywhere you looked. April was up $1.05 on the close at 172.55. On the lean hog trade yesterday, we wrapped up with the April up $1.82 at 104.15. So that was pretty strong market activity here on the livestock trade yesterday. Can they follow through today?
Well, what you're going to see, I think, in the cattle, in the case of feeder cattle, probably a little bit firmer opening and some follow-through buying and ideas. We're going to see stronger cash trade. That's coming from the slaughter pace this week. So far, we're about 1,000 head more than we were last week and well ahead of last year's pace. That's really positive from the standpoint that we're going to probably have another 650,000 head plus killed this week, meaning packers are going to need some cattle and some inventory. So we're probably going to have to pay up for the cash market this week. So far, only 140 bids have been seen, and I would suspect today, tomorrow, we're going to start to see more aggressive cash cattle trade. Feeder cattle could back off a little bit here if the corn market starts to find some footing, starts to rally. I would suspect feeders will be the first to break, and live cattle would be pretty solid based off the stronger cash markets.
Real quickly, how are the weights running this week?
Yeah, that was a problem with the cattle market last week, kind of why we sold off on Thursday, Friday. Steer weights were up about 3 pounds from a week prior to that and over 6 pounds heavier than a year ago. So the idea was we were moving through some of these heavier weight cattle. That's probably not the case. We need to see better confirmation that we're working through some of these heavier weight cattle and getting more current on some of our supplies. That is the one thing that's kind of holding us back at this point.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I appreciate the input this morning, and have a good day trading. Brian Hoops of Midwest Market Solutions. Tammy, we're about ready to kick this thing off at the bottom of the hour.